Hello there, and welcome to another Kenny vs. Spenny season review. Now, I already did season 1, and season 1 was surprisingly quite decent for my channel, and so let's go on to season 2. Season 2 is luckily a lot more shorter, has less episodes, but is it better than season 1? Does it have a increase in quality, or does it decrease in quality? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that is just by looking at all the episodes. So I'll be going through every episode individually, giving you my personal thoughts. Now, some of these have appeared in my top 10 best and top 10 worst Kenny vs. Spenny episodes, so some of them you probably already know what I personally think of them. Obviously, this is all subjective. This is all my own personal opinion. If you like something, you dislike something, well, that's just you. So let's go on with the first episode of Kenny vs. Spenny Season 2. The first episode is Who Can Drink More Beer? This is a fantastic episode. I actually rank this as my second favourite episode of all time because it's just so good. This is just pure perfection. As you can see, I still got a cough. It just won't go away. This competition is perfection from beginning to end. Like, this is the reason. Octopus obviously is number one in my opinion, but this is a very close second because of how good it is. It's a great way of showing off to the viewers and the fans of the show that this series is going to increase the pressure on the two. It's going to make things a lot more brutal. It's going to make things a lot more so to speak, intense. It is going to be a bigger and better and brutal series. And so series 2 of Kenny vs. Spenny is trying to entice the viewers by saying, look what we're going to do this series and from this point on, compared to how tame series 1 sort of was. Series 1 is a very slow and more quiet series. This is more exciting, more in your face, more exaggerated. I love the scheme that Kenny has in this. They're both drinking beer, but Kenny is drinking non-alcoholic beer, meaning that he won't get drunk. The idea is Spenny has to eat. It's not eat, well, he does, but the idea is Spenny is going to vomit first, because that's who loses the competition. Obviously, behind the scenes, we know that Spenny was a bit of an alcoholic in general, so he probably was in a better spot than Kenny would have been if Kenny did compete legitimately. And I love the fact that Kenny manipulates Spenny throughout this. Like, he knows Spenny is genuinely drunk while he is pretending to drink. He's pretending to, go ahead and, drink these fake beers and, try and get Spenny just wasted to the point that he is functionless. And, he tries to do things like pretend to vomit or, like, take him to the bathroom and all that stuff. And I love that. I love that so much. But of course, some of the great highlights include the band scene, where you have this band playing instruments as they come in, while Spenny is clearly hungover, and it's hilarious. It's one of the funniest scenes in the entire show. I absolutely adore it. The other absolutely hilarious scene, and again, fucking brilliant, is the little intervention scene where Kenny gets these Alcoholic Anonymous people, I don't know who they are, enter a very drunk and, let's be honest, they're quite aggressive Spenny, and just they try to talk down to Spenny, and Spenny is shouting at them, but then he says, okay, we're in a competition, blah blah blah, and it doesn't go anywhere, but it is just hilarious nonetheless. And of course, Kenny has gone on record to say that this actually inspired a show called Intervention because of this particular scene. The other great moment, which is, in my opinion, quite underrated, is the Spenny rage moment. So Spenny passes out. He passes out quite a few times during this episode because he's so drunk. Kenny, I forgot what he does. He puts smelling salts up his nose, and Spenny fucking freaks out and reacts. He yells. He's got a hockey stick. He smacks the table. He smashes shit all over the place. He then decides to storm out the house. He tries climbing a tree, smashes his face up and bleeds. And he starts yelling at the camera, saying, Kenny wins, Spenny gets hurt, blah, blah, blah. And then it cuts, and it's a perfect cut. It gets me every time. And even, picturing it makes me laugh, of Spenny crying his eyes out. on Kenny's shoulder. I'm just picturing it right now, and it's making me laugh. This episode is pure gold. This is genuinely one of the greatest episodes, and it's only the first episode of series 2. Like, if that doesn't set a high bar, then I don't know what does. This is a must-watch episode. You have to see this episode. It's fantastic. Up next is another fantastic episode, another episode which I put on my favourite list, and this is Who Can Stay Naked the Longest. Admittedly, this is a type of competition that I would never do, because I don't want to ever do stuff like that. But I love this competition, mainly because of the scheme that Kenny has in this, and the sort of foreshadowing of said scheme. Spenny is, we already know that Spenny is very self-conscious about his penis, and he doesn't like the idea of anyone seeing him naked and all that. Kenny, he really doesn't care, and of course Spenny gets a nudist at one point to try and help him out, but Kenny is trying his best to just assault Spenny's integrity, and we see he get one of the funniest moments is when he calls like a bunch of gay bikers to come in and just hound Spenny across the house, and it is hilarious. That scene is great. Probably illegal, but it's hilarious. But throughout the episode, Kenny makes a point about how the competition has really started because Spenny is still wearing his watch, and there is a constant foreshadowing of watches and clocks and everything, which is what makes this finale to this particular episode fantastic. So after the gay biker scene, Spenny is furious. He is absolutely furious. He sits in the basement. He's got a fucking kitchen knife, and he is angry. He is like sat there. He's refusing to do anything. He's gonna wait it out and ruin the competition by forcing a draw where both of them basically lose and no one wins. But Kenny does something very smart, something that is so devious and so clever that I actually think this is fantastically done. He changes all the clocks, all the watches, everything, so that it's like, what was it, like 20 minutes before the actual competition end? And thus, one Spenny comes back up and tries to ruin the competition. He says something along the lines of, well, it's a draw, and he puts his clothes back on. Kenny doesn't, because he says that the competition hasn't ended. And that's when the revelation of the time and the clocks being changed. And it is such a perfect maneuver right here. It is such a brilliant scheme, such a fantastic plan. And I love that. Like, that is truly one of my favorite Kenny plans in the whole show. It's just a very entertaining episode overall. It's not as good as the first one. The first one is like a million times better, but this is obviously my top 10 for a reason, because it is just very highly entertaining, and the scheming is so devious. I love it. I will say this though, the humiliation in this episode was shit. Like, even in the commentary for this episode, Kenny and Spenny both kind of agreed the humiliation was sucked. Sucked. Because all Spenny does is stand on a busy corner and say that he has a small penis. That's it. It's very boring. It's a shame that humiliation does suck, especially when you have the first episode where he has to eat vomit, which is fucked up and horrible, but it's a good humiliation. This one is just a slight downgrade. But as an episode, this is fantastic. So far, Series 2 has 2 great episodes. I hope things don't go wrong, if that isn't just a hint to what's coming next. All right, so might as well get this one out of the way. The third episode is, to a lot of people, one of the single worst episodes in the entirety of the show. That is, who has the biggest balls? This episode fucking sucks. This is just... There's a reason why a lot of people put this as one of the worst. Some people even put it as the number 1 worst episode. It is a disaster of an episode. For one thing, we already sort of had an episode like this where the mini competitions, and that was a million times better. Like, the mini competitions, sure, were a lot more tamer than the ones in this one, but they were better. Not only that, but in a later episode we have Who Can Handle More Torture, which is again a much better episode than this one. this episode, the actual competition side of things, and this is probably why I ranked it quite low on my worst list, because I had some more that I found to be far worse. Although, looking back on it, I probably would lift it up a bit more, because it really is just a shit episode. I did say at that point, I do think the episode's idea is okay, and I think that some of the mini competitions are fun and enjoyable. But this episode is completely ruined by Spenny. Spenny fucking ruins this episode. And, I've mentioned before, the worst Kenny versus Spenny episodes are the ones that feel staged. And this one, oh boy, this one feels absolutely staged, to the point that there is no way this actually happened. I refuse to believe this actually happened. Kenny runs into Spenny's room, trashes his belongings, scaring him, and Spenny then goes over to a cliff and he hangs himself over and he says he's going to jump, and of course we know for a fact this isn't going to happen. I mean, for fuck's sake. And the episode is ruined because Kenny is forced to forfeit because Spenny is trying to kill himself. And then Spenny decides to do one of the most horrific humiliations imaginable, where he forces Kenny to lick bird shit off of the car windshield. It's like, this episode, there's a reason why a lot of people fucking hate this episode. There's a reason why this is considered one of the worst episodes in the entire show. This is not just the worst episode of Series 3. This is one of the worst in Series 2, it is one of the worst as a whole. This ending is fucking awful. Absolutely awful. For one thing, it feels staged. And as I mentioned, whenever the show feels staged, it feels like crap. It's just crap, When it's not so staged, it is fun. You can have things that feel somewhat staged and be entertained, but it's very rare. And the way Spenny acts in this is just irritating. Spenny, you just want to fucking shoot the guy. He is so irritating in this. This is just easily one of the worst episodes ever. Genuinely one of the worst episodes ever. There is nothing redeemable about this. So the step down in quality continues to sort of be leveled off a bit, sort of rises a tiny bit. This is who do old people like more, the who do X like more challenges. I've said before, they're usually some of the most despised, some of the most disliked, some of the most the controversial ones. They're the ones that people don't like. In this case, Kenny and Spenny have to spend time with a bunch of old ladies. Kenny finds out that these old ladies are Jewish old ladies, and while Spenny, does everything in his power to, treat the old ladies nicely and all that, Kenny comes up with an idea of having a fake brother called Lenny, who has Down syndrome, as to emotionally manipulate the old people. It's quite a clever scheme, really, but the scheme does sort of backfire. And in many ways, this scheme could have resulted in Kenny losing, because Kenny tries to come up with this plot line where Spenny, when they were a child, was mean to Lenny. And that Lenny was bullied and belittled by Spenny, and that Spenny is just a cruel and nasty human being, as to sort of turn the old people against Spenny. Obviously, this doesn't work because Lenny, being someone with Down syndrome, he kind of forgets the script a bit, and he makes several mistakes. However, surprisingly, Kenny still wins 3-0. This is a very know-nothing episode. It's not as bad as the previous episode. You can at least watch this one again. But who do old people like more? Even the humiliation, why it fits with the episode, is just, it's lacking. Who Can Dance the Longest is the 5th episode, and this one I quite like the intention behind it. The idea is both Kenny and Spenny have to dance, and Kenny is stalling for time. Spenny, thinks that the competition should start and Kenny should start dancing. Kenny does start dancing, but he states very specifically that he will start dancing once he's changed his shoes. Spenny agrees. Spenny also makes sure to try and record Kenny, or have all the recordings shown to him so that he knows that Kenny isn't cheating by not dancing. And as we see throughout the whole show, Kenny, he doesn't dance. He sneaks out the house, he goes all over the place, he doesn't dance. Spenny, on the other hand, gets more and more tired as he's dancing, not only like in the house, but also all over the place. He tries to investigate what the hell Kenny is doing, where he's gone, is he doing stuff, and of course no one tells him anything, because let's be honest, Spenny is a bit of a fucking creep. So Kenny is constantly, just not dancing while Spenny is constantly dancing. Kenny goes and sees a bunch of cheerleaders, and this kind of links into what we see at the end. And then Kenny decides to rest and relax. And he's not dancing, and Spenny catches him. Spenny thinks that it's a win. However, Spenny is then shown the tapes. Keep in mind, Kenny at the very beginning said that he would start the competition, start dancing, once he changed his shoes. He didn't change his shoes, which meant that the competition, by technicality, did not start. So a very tired and, pretty much exhausted Spenny is, instead of just accepting, defeat and all that, Spenny and Kenny decide to have a dancing competition. This is really where the competition actually begins. But because Spenny has used up all his energy the whole time, he just physically cannot handle it, and he is done for. He collapses, and Kenny wins. A very mischievous and quite clever plan, all things considered. The cheerleaders are brought back for the humiliation. Spenny is dressed up as a cheerleader, and they have to perform a very degrading Spenny cheer. It's not a great humiliation, but I do like the scheme of this episode. This episode scheme is quite clever. The episode as a whole is pretty average, all things considered. It's not a special episode by any stretch of the imagination, but the idea and of the not changing your shoes until afterwards, it's great. It's absolutely great. I think that the intention behind it is really the best part. The planning, the mischievous plan, is the best part. The rest of it, yeah, you could probably skip. Next up is Who Can Talk, or first one to talk losers. Who can talk the most. This is a Spenny Wins episode, and this one is an interesting episode because there's a lot of debate over whether or not Kenny, or Spenny for that matter, actually talked before Spenny wins. The reason why is because throughout the episode, Kenny and Spenny are making noises. They're going like that, and is that verbal communication? Obviously, it seems like they must have had a rule where they said grunts and all that do not count. So they don't obviously talk throughout the whole episode. So a lot of the humor comes from the visuals alone. There's this brilliant visual where Spenny walks up the stairs, and Kenny, who's dressed up like a caveman, has a fucking chainsaw. It's just great. He turns it on, and Spenny, he's got this face, and he just walks back. Spenny, on the other hand, he's trying to catch Kenny out, and one of the things he tries to do is he tries to use a microphone to catch him when he's talking in his sleep, because, of course, he talks a lot in his sleep. Not only that, but he later goes on to go ahead and try to get someone to convince him, and this someone is his cousin, because Kenny is infatuated with Spenny's cousin. And so, despite all the other plans failing, this one actually does work because Kenny whispers, and because he catches it on microphone, he uses it against Kenny. It's quite an ingenious way of Spenny winning, and whilst I don't really like episodes where Spenny wins because a lot of the time they aren't as interesting or as good, this one is probably a rare exception because this is actually quite a good episode, and I think Spenny, plans are quite ingenious, to be fair, to give credit where credit due. And I think his method of catching Kenny out worked very well, which is why I think this is a very good episode overall. That said, because they're not really communicating with each other, you don't get as much of the humor as you would get in a lot of other episodes. A lot of it is based on visuals alone, which is fine, and it does work quite well, as I mentioned already. The caveman and chainsaw thing, or even super gluing Spenny to a table or something. They work really well. The humiliation is not too bad either. Kenny just has his mouth washed out with soap. He's such a foul person. But again, it's not brilliant. Anyways, I think this is a very good episode. It's definitely an improvement from the previous few episodes. And overall, yeah, I quite like the episode idea as well. I think the competition idea works really well. Up next is Who is Funnier? Now, I mean, already Kenny is the funniest out of the two because Spenny is fucking painfully awful. But this particular episode, remember when I said that sometimes, very few times, there could be these staged moments which feel, they feel staged, but they're actually quite good. Who is Funnier is a good example of this. Is Spenny really that retarded that he thinks that a letter from the Ministry of Health informing him that he may have HIV is real? I don't know, but the outcome of it is hilarious. I love the fact that Kenny manages to do this. He tricks him. He creates a fake letter, and Spenny just believes it. He's very gullible. He is demoralized throughout the whole of this episode. He is depressed, and Kenny, we already know what's happened. We already know that Kenny is, has done this trick. Spenny is completely, off it. And, even when Spenny does his stand-up comedy routine, he's just really boring. I feel like even if Kenny didn't cheat necessarily or didn't do what he did in this, it's one of these episodes where I feel like Spenny would have lost anyway because he's just not very funny at all. Whereas Kenny, he is funny. He is, humorous. He might be a little bit childish, he might be a little bit offensive, but he always has something funny up his sleeve. He always does something that is hilarious. And this episode culminates with Kenny not even doing a stand-up routine because he shows and tells what he had done to Spenny. And he pretty much automatically wins as a result because Spenny is just, he can't do it. Spenny, quite early on, actually finds out what Kenny has done, and you see his reaction. He fucking goes apeshit. He destroys all of Kenny's stuff. And, Spenny is obviously much more relieved towards the end, but I think this is just a humorous episode. I mean, it's called Who is Funnier, but I think what makes it really great is obviously the whole scheme and how it's approached, and also, Spenny's reaction to said scheme. I think everything hits the right notes in a way. But at the same time, I do think that even if it was done legitimately, I don't think Spenny would have won. Spenny, it's like another case of who does she like more, where Spenny is just such a fucking freak that he probably would have lost regardless. But nonetheless, I think this is great. Of course, Spenny does all sex on a condom-covered cucumber. I believe this isn't even the first time he does this. It happens quite a lot, surprisingly. But, the humiliation kind of is lame. But all things considered, this is quite a good episode. It's quite an infamous episode as well. A lot of people remember this quite fondly and for good reason. Spenny, I do believe that Spenny would have failed regardless because he just isn't very charismatic. He isn't very funny. He isn't really a people's person. He even admits that. So even if it was done legitimately, I don't think he would have won. I genuinely don't. But regardless, we got a great story out of it with the whole fake letter thing and him being tricked, and yeah, it's just very funny. So up next is Who Can Kiss More Women? Now this episode is, well, as I've just mentioned in the previous episode where Spenny would have lost regardless, I think in this case Spenny, would have lost regardless anyway, because he, how do I put it? He is basically, not the most approachable person. We see later on in the Who Can Squeeze More Boobs episode that Spenny is just a fucking weirdo. That one, which is done legitimately compared to this one, which is done legitimately to a certain extent. He just isn't very approachable. He's the type of person that would be on a sex offenders list, let's be honest now. He's a very weird, awkward, creepy guy. And Kenny, I remember this comment once before on one of the Kenny vs. Spenny episodes. Someone wrote this comment. I think it really rings true about Kenny and Spenny in the sense that Kenny tries to be a freak, but is actually quite normal. where Spenny tries to be normal but is a complete freak. And I think, in a case like this is a good example of what it is. I mean, especially in the Squeeze More Boobs, which is sort of a sequel to this particular episode. I think, Spenny, even if he didn't get distracted by the fact that this one girl may have been a proxy by Kenny, of course she wasn't, that, he would have lost, perhaps, because I don't think people are going to be on Spenny's side. And even then, like, taking into consideration the TV show side of things, Kenny is way more popular than Spenny. Like, let's be honest, like, people are going to go for Kenny rather than Spenny. So basically what happens in this episode, they both are doing the competition legitimately. There's no cheating going on here. However, Spenny at one point meets a girl. And this girl, she promises that we can meet up and they'll help him with more kisses. And Spenny is really happy. However, his camera guy, his crew member, I forgot the name of him, but he's the one that gets fired later on. And it's because of reasons like this where he interferes with the competition why he gets fired. He says, well, what if it's a fake woman sent in by Kenny to sabotage the competition? Spenny, being the gullible retard he is, especially given what we saw in the previous episode, he believes it. And he refuses to meet this woman. He refuses to do many other things. He's more cautious and he fucks up. Spenny fucks himself over because he believes a lie. And so Spenny loses because he thinks that, this girl is, a fake. Kenny is trying to cheat. Kenny, didn't cheat, actually. Kenny was actually quite smart. And so in the end, the score is 420 for Kenny and only 33 for Spenny. Now, I do believe that even if this didn't happen, I think Spenny still would have lost. Because, as we've seen in the Squeeze More Boobs episode, he is not approachable. He is a very weird human being. To add to this, Spenny's humiliation in this is to kiss the butt and testicles of a horse statue, which is probably one of the lamest humiliations of them all. It's weird, but it's if it was a real horse, or real, a horse probably would be too dangerous. If it was something something smaller, like a goat, it makes sense, but, it'd be an actual good humiliation. But yeah, this episode, it's an alright episode. It's pretty mediocre, all things considered. I don't really care that much for it. It's not the one that I'd rewatch again, if that makes sense. It's a one and done. Like, the interaction between him and Kenny are lacking, which is one of the best parts about the show. You like to see these two interact when they're apart, especially for these episodes like this or Squeeze More Boobs. It is painfully dull as a result. Up next is Who Can Sell More Bibles? This episode is another one that has been contested as being fake, because how the fuck is Spenny this retarded? How is he this gullible? Now, admittedly, Kenny, has said many times that Spenny is genuinely this gullible. He is genuinely this, stupid. But at the same time, he'll be able to, have spy cameras and, spy on Kenny and know what he's doing, or he'll see, his shoes are different, or, his finger is different. He'll suss out these things. It's Spenny is a very odd person to figure out, really, because you don't know if he is, genuinely as stupid as he appears to be, or if he isn't. So in Who Can Sell More Bibles, the idea is they have to sell more Bibles, and Kenny tricks Spenny by once again writing a fake letter, thing, saying that his children's script is being bought by Hollywood executives, and Spenny thinks it's real. And Kenny, Kenny's plan works too flawlessly, in my opinion. I know I went on about how much I really don't like stagedness in these episodes, and this one is hard to describe because some people think it is staged, some people don't, and there is a lot of evidence for both sides. And to be fair, this is quite an entertaining episode. Don't get me wrong, this is still a very entertaining episode. and it is somewhat clever. But yeah, so Kenny tricks Spenny in this idea. There's these fake, conference calls, and I love the Hollywood, the fake Hollywood executives come up with all these ideas. I love because it's so topical. It is so topical. Even to this day, the idea of we need to have all these diverse characters. We need to have, them do all this stuff. We need to make references to political events. It's the irony is not lost on me, considering what a lot of modern movies and TV shows are like. It's almost poetically in the sense that it predicted the future. But yeah, so Spenny, he's tricked into this. He actually agrees with all these points, by the way. He thinks oh yeah, we should do this, we should do that. So Spenny decides he's going to quit the show, and because at the end of the day, he's become a big Hollywood screenwriter. Everyone's going to love him and all that. Kenny, of course, calls his bluff, and I love the fact that Kenny outright explicitly says it's all bullshit. And Spenny, being so egotistical, thinks it's all true. And Kenny then does the whole, okay, do you want to buy a Bible then? And of course Spenny, and this is where I feel like some of the stagedness probably come in, because Spenny just buys 7 Bibles off of Kenny, up front. And, one could argue, okay, well, he's doing it because he's mocking Kenny because he thinks that he's going to go somewhere. But at the same time, Spenny, it just feels very unnatural. I don't know, it's just me. I do love a lot of the religious, symbolism throughout this whole episode. You have Kenny pretending to be a priest, Kenny being the devil. And throughout the episode, he makes references to Bible verses, referencing, Spenny's own actions and his own actions for that matter. I do like that. I think that's quite clever. That said, the humiliation is basically the fact that Spenny flies off to Los Angeles and is not picked up whatsoever. And he finds out and he's really fucking angry about it, to the point that Kenny barricades his door so that Spenny doesn't, assault him. So yeah, this episode obviously has a lot of questions raised about the authenticity of it. I do quite like this episode. I think because it has got the humor factor, and I think the humor factor really does save this episode a lot. But at the same time, I can understand why a lot of people probably won't like this episode, and I can understand why a lot of people think it's probably staged. Again, this is sort of like a mixed bag episode, but I think, again, the humor works really well in this episode. So yeah, I think this is decent. Up next is Who Can Win a Rat Race. This is another animal-related competition. The first series, we had Who Can Sit on a Cow. This time it's Rat Race. So this episode is quite cute. I love the little rodents. I love the animals. I think it's so adorable. I love the fact that, Kenny holds Spenny's rat Sally ransom. But at the same time, we have another, is it staged part to this, and that is when he kidnaps Spenny's mother and threatens her life, which is all bullshit. Of course, Spenny, on the other hand, tries to destroy Kenny's records, which include Hitler and all that. Yeah. So Kenny tries to use a capybara, tries to use, other animals to try and win this race. And ironically, Spenny wins. Spenny wins this rat race because, despite the fact that he has a giant capybara, the capybara gets distracted and the rat continues moving. However, Spenny did cheat because he actually picked up the rat and put it, back on line. So yeah, this episode, how do I really describe it? It's compared to the previous animal related episode, which was cow, this is a much better one. But it does have cute things in it, but again, for whatever reason, series 2 really has a problem with a lot of these staged moments that really bring down the episodes. Why do they need to include these staged moments in the show? I bet you, whenever people have told Kenny, oh, your show is fake and all that, and all that bullshit. I bet you they probably reference a lot of the things that happen in this particular series, because so far we are having a stage moment here, stage moment here, stage moment here, stage moment here, and it's so painfully obvious. It's not like hidden or subtle or anything. It's just, yeah. I mean, the actual rat race is real and legitimate, but legitimate in the sense that Kenny does try to cheat and Spenny does cheat. And I will say this, I like the humiliation where Kenny has a live rat put in his underwear. My only assumption why this episode is so staged is because they didn't have enough material. That is my only assumption. My assumption is they knew that they didn't have enough material, and thus they needed to come up with material, which is why they create the whole kidnapping scenario, which is all bullshit and painfully so. That's my only assumption. And honestly, like, I don't hate this episode because I think, you know, the animals are cute and I think the idea is quite fun. I think the ending is hilarious. But really, the middle section of this episode fucking sucks. Like, this is, again, a very mixed bag episode. So, first one to be mean loses. This one is very poorly thought out in terms of the rule sets. Because Kenny, you know, he is going to try and kill Spenny with kindness. So he tries to be all kind and sweet, but the truth is he's being mean. You know, he's doing things like giving him a parrot. He's doing things like, confessing that he had sex with Spenny's girlfriend, which he never actually did. He does all these things, which is to hide mean acts, but then Spenny reacts in a mean manner, hence why, you know, Kenny is trying to get Spenny to fucking react. Like, the whole point of this episode is Kenny wants to get Spenny to erupt in anger and, you know, just attack him. Of course, the real last straw is definitely the Spenny girlfriend thing, which Spenny is pissed off about. And, you know, he then consumes all these, like, sleeping pills and all that to try and go to sleep, which forces the competition to a draw. So, again, Spenny ruins an episode because Spenny is a cunt who cannot accept losing, despite the fact that he loses, like, 99% of the competitions. So, yeah, Kenny, however, doesn't want to accept this loss. So, Kenny dresses Spenny up as a clown and then urinates all over him. So Spenny loses, technically. I think this is such a fun, like, I think the ideas behind what Kenny is trying to do against Spenny is very well thought out. I think, his malicious planning is great. I think the whole idea of killing him with kindness or, hiding what is, let's be honest, how mean acts to get Spenny to fucking freak out, to try and get Spenny to be mean. But again, one has to wonder if Spenny was actually being mean to Kenny, because the way he reacts sometimes is like, one could argue, Spenny lost almost immediately. I mean, technically speaking, he does lose, because even though it's a draw this episode, Spenny still suffers humiliation because, because he fucked everything up. There is a fun little deleted scene in this intermission where, they're allowed to be mean to each other and Kenny just punches Spenny inside the head and then holds him in a chokehold, and then everything goes, then the timer is up and they're allowed to, be friendly to each other. It's hilarious. Spenny is genuinely shaking and, he's being given a hug by the guy that just assaulted him. But this episode, it has a lot of great moments. This is definitely a step up from what is a trail of very mediocre episodes. And I think the idea behind it is great. I think the planning and maliciousness of Kenny in this particular episode is fantastic. I think it's well drawn. Yeah, this is a very good episode. I think the ending is a little bit disappointing, mainly because Spenny does ruin everything again. But Spenny also gets humiliated and is humiliated pretty fucking harshly as well. All things considered. So Spenny's still technically lost, even if it is technically a draw. Alright then, so the final two episodes of Kenny vs. Spenny Season 2. So the first one is Who is the Better Journalist? I fucking hate this episode. I don't know what else to say. This is one of the worst fucking episodes ever. I said it in my previous, top 10 worst episodes list. This is bad. I said it multiple times already. the worst episodes of Kenny vs. Spenny are the ones that feel staged. This is, again, a staged one. And you know it's staged because there is no fucking way this is legit. So, Kenny tries to create fake news articles, which is quite amusing, all things considered. And it is a good tactic, all things considered. Spenny obviously tries to do something legitimate. However, when it comes to judging, Spenny wins because Kenny doesn't show because apparently he's fucking one of the models. This is completely bullshit. So for those that don't know, after Series 1, Series 2 had a different rule set to Series 1, and that is behind the scenes, and Kenny has said this multiple times, and even one of the recent commentaries he's done, he mentions, sometimes Spenny has to win. Spenny has to win sometimes, and that is, a quote that you've probably heard before, but yeah. And so this episode, you can painfully tell that this is an episode where they realise, Spenny needs to win sometimes, so he needs to have a automatic win. They could have done it a whole lot better, though. They could have done things a whole lot better. Because this is just awful. It's a painfully boring episode as well. There's nothing good about this episode. It's boring. The ending is completely fucking fabricated. And even the humiliation kind of sucks. Kenny is on a toilet placed on a sidewalk of a busy street. I mean, it's not the worst thing ever. And Kenny being an narcissist, he doesn't really care. There's nothing good about this episode. There's nothing good about this episode. And unfortunately, the next episode is just as bad. It's funny, while we were reviewing Series 1, I said multiple times there are episodes which I would argue should have been in the best list, and I kind of feel bad not including them. For example, Who is the Better Parent is fucking hilarious. It probably should have been in the best list, but I mean, it was omitted, unfortunately. It should have been in the top 10, maybe even maybe not top 10, but even top 15, but it was a top 10 list. Yeah, this is an episode that should have been in my top 10 worst episode. This is Who is the Better Rapper, and there's a consensus that this is a staged episode, which is rather a common theme, have we noticed, throughout Series 2. Who is the Better Rapper? Kenny and Spenny have to come up with their own rap. Kenny tries to trick Spenny into thinking, he's offended, because he did offend some, low-life rappers. And, he said, there's a drive-by shooting, you gotta be taken away for your own protection. Of course, Spenny notices, hang on a second, this is a fake policeman. I can tell because I looked at his shoes, I looked at this. And so, Spenny all of a sudden gets smart. And then at the end, Kenny just does a very boring, simple rhyme, basically. And he's hoping that Spenny doesn't appear. Spenny then suddenly appears with this big old, over the top, girls everywhere, him in costume, and he raps, and yeah. That was basically what happens. And this episode is very bad. I don't know what else to say. This is a very bad episode. There is virtually no substance in this episode. It is boring. It is dull. The competition itself, could have worked, but again, that stagedness starts ruining its ugly head, and it ruins everything. And obviously, Spenny wins. The humiliation backfires on Spenny because, despite having a Kenny is a loser displayed on a large outdoor TV screen, along with some other unflattering images, Kenny enjoys it. He thinks it's funny. And so he enjoys it, so that he didn't even get humiliated in the end. This is just a bad episode. Just bad episode. And it's a shame that the final 2 episodes of Series 2 are so god-awful. But there is a trend I've noticed when you look at all these episodes. And this trend is something that I think should be discussed right about now in my overall conclusion regarding this second series. Okay then, so overall, Series 2, upon rewatching, I'd argue is weaker than Series 1. Series 2 starts off so strongly with Beer and Naked, but then it takes a nosedive with Bigger Balls, and after that you get a lot of mediocre episodes, and it doesn't seem to improve itself. The final 2 episodes are beyond god awful. Like, what the hell happened? Like, why is series, like, the more I look about it, series 2 is probably the weakest series of them all. Like, I used to think series 1 was quite weak because it was so slow and there were so many episodes and a lot of them were unnecessary or pretty dull. But at least, you know, there weren't as many really bad episodes or really bad offenders. Series 2, on the other hand, there are so many bad offenders. There are so many, like, really boring and painfully average episodes that I'm actually shocked by how bad Series 2 really is, all things considered. Like, it starts off so strongly and, you know, you have all this intention behind it, but then after that, it just drops. It nosedives in quality. You know, Series 2 is shockingly poor, like, all things considered, and there's a trend throughout this series. There is a lot of staged moments in this second series. So why is Series 2 so staged? Why does it feel so staged? My assumption is because they went to a new broadcaster for Series 2, the new broadcaster must have had some sort of creative control. And as a result, their creative control meant that they wanted a bit more, you know, for one thing, we already know about the whole Spenny needs to win sometimes rule. But they wanted a bit more, like, dare I say, plot lines involved in the episodes. But what made Series 1 work quite well was the fact that it could have plot lines, but these plot lines were interjected with the reality. With Series 2, the plot lines do not interject with the reality whatsoever. It feels like a just thought of these plot lines and then thought of the competitions and they decided to make it up on the spot. And as a result, you get really awful staged moments which just are embarrassing, honestly. These are some of the most embarrassing moments I think I can tell. And it has 3 of the worst episodes in the show's history, you know, right up front. It's shocking, honestly. It is absolutely shocking just how piss poor this second series really is in retrospect. You know, you have 2 fantastic episodes to start off with, and then after that, it's just bad or very average. You get some decent ones like Talk and Mean, which I think are great in their own right. But, like, it is just shocking how low in quality Series 2 really is. Like, there's a, you know, I often talk about how there's a thing known as the first series syndrome, where the first series of a show is usually very weak and very, how do I put it? Very stilted. It's trying to find its feet. The second series syndrome, on the other hand, this is something that I've noticed a lot with a lot of TV shows in retrospect, is that while the second series has, like, it usually has a bigger budget and can do a lot more, they tend to fuck it up. You know, good examples include, you look at Doctor Who's reboot, for example, 2005 reboot. The first series is really good, but, you know, there's some things that probably need sorting out. The second series is a massive nosedive in quality. Like, if you look at the 2 back-to-back, second series is really bad compared to Series 1. There's some great episodes, like the Cybermen episodes, but, you know, the rest of it is very mediocre and very awkward. Similarly, you have BattleBots, you know, both the Comedy Central and the new era. The second seasons of both were bad. Like, they were massively worse than the previous seasons that came before it, or the ones that come after it. You know, again, like, one has to wonder why the flying fuck they chose to go in such a direction that completely, you know, mangled Series 2 in a way. It's shocking, really. And I was surprised, you know, because for the Series 1 video and for this video, I, you know, went ahead and rewatched these seasons. So, you know, to say that I, you know, so that I have like a refresh of my memory, you know, even though I do forget sometimes some of the bits, sort of refresh it. And I was shocked by how I was not entertained by Series 2 for the most part. Like, there is really only 2 really standout great episodes, and they're the first 2 episodes. And I feel like the production team knew this because everything else is just such a slog. It's not to say, you know, as I said, there are some highlights here and there. I think Dance is pretty decent. I think Mean is very good. Talk is also very entertaining, but and he was funny as well. But aside from those episodes, the rest of it is painfully average and or really fucking bad, like worse than anything in series 1. So yeah, like in retrospect, series 2 is kind of a step down from series 1, and I'm shocked to say that, but it's kind of true. Like series 2 just wasn't as entertaining as series 1, I'll be honest. And series 3, I think, is still with the same broadcaster, but series 3, if I remember from memory from past watching, series 3 is definitely a big step up. But I think really series 4 and 5, which a lot of people, including myself, consider the best seasons, are really where the show hits its high marks. Because I think by series 4 they moved to Comedy Central, and I think that's where things actually kicked up a gear and actually became, fantastic. But series 2 really was a step down, and it's a shame to say that, because it has Beer, which is one of my all-time favorite episodes. It has Naked, another fantastic episode, and it sucks to say that, but one of the biggest problems with this series, and I've repeated it multiple times throughout this video, is the fact that it tries so hard to stage in plot lines which don't need to be there. The first series was able to do storylines naturally, so to speak, with the events that are taking place. Series 2 wants to just make up shit just to create a storyline, and that really fucking annoys me. I said it before, I say again, when Kenny vs. Spenny feels staged, it doesn't feel good. And I think this is what happened with series 2. They tried staging things and it backfired. So yeah, overall, series 2 is a step down, but I do find the first 2 episodes in particular to be fantastic, and they are must-watches. And to be fair, on a technical scale, series 2 is better. Camera work, editing, everything is much better than series 1 by a long shot. But episode-wide, entertainment-wise, it's not as good. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this Kenny vs. Spenny series 2 review video. As you can see, it's probably not as long as series 1 because there's less episodes to talk about. But I'll see you next time, hopefully with series 3, which will hopefully, upon rewatch, will be a much better series.